Rabbi, help us out. Which?
It's the one after Kadoshi, Parshat Emor.
Emor.
These are people that less holy. It comes after the holy section, it goes less holy.
Well,
Check
yes
that
and no,
out.
because Emor is Emor al Kohanim. Speak to the Kohanim and to all of the Israelites. But we are specifically
Okay.
chapter 22, verse 17.
7:14.
Verse 17.
Emor.
No, that's chapter 20. So 22 is
22, 17, 23, 22.
7:20. It's 22.
22,
7:20 is.
That's the page number, right?
We are
Down the road.
beginning in the middle of page 722.
Oh, well, that's.
722.
Page 722, chapter 22, verse 17.
Got it.
You found it? What page is it on?
722. I mean, somebody said that.
Rabbi,
Yeah, but what does he know?
lots.
My thought exactly.
It's 22:14.
17, 22, 17.
Guess what? It's still on this page. And the Lord spoke to Moses. Boy, that's a brand new drawing. I heard in there too. Yeah.
And it's,
And the sons were dead.
Two of
some
them.
of them are living.
Oh, some are
He
still
had
living?
4,
Okay.
2 are still with us,
722.
or with him. Okay, so let's read a little bit and see what's going on. Parshat Emor, as I said, has Moses speaking to, as our verse does here. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, speak to Aaron and his sons and to all the Israelite people and say to them. What's notable here, for my purpose, is that the Israelites are equally included, which means that the material that follows applies not just to the Kohanim, but to everybody equally.
Okay.
And so what is Moses supposed to say to them?
Wait a minute, why is it, normally I was being facetious, but Daber el B'nai Yisrael, and the Lord called to Moses saying, speak to the children of Israel. Why all of a sudden we're speaking to Aaron?
Oh, well, it's to Aaron and his sons as the Kohanim who are going to be responsible. Like most of the book of Leviticus is spoken to the Kohanim who are responsible as the religious officiants. And therefore, the book of Leviticus, as its name implies, is directed at the Levitical group, of which the Kohanim are a subset. It's more unusual for the book of Levim to be broadly encompassing, but there are definitely places where it needs to. So, for example, I'm sure you remember, because you all do that, that when the description regarding kosher and non-kosher animals is presented, it's addressed to the entire community. Why? Because the entire community is responsible for maintaining those rules. Okay, so what is it that is going to be true for everybody? When any man of the house of Israel or of the strangers in Israel presents a burnt offering as his offering for any of the votive or any of the freewill offerings that they offer to the Lord, it must, to be acceptable in your favor, be a male without blemish from cattle or sheep or goats. You shall not offer any that has a defect, for it will not be accepted in your favor. Okay, so what types of offerings are we talking about here? These are not the mandatory ones. These are the optional or self-committed nature. So if you make a vow, fulfillment is required. But what if you just want to make an offering? You're feeling particularly positively disposed towards Gog, the world, the Jewish people, or Chveisvus. And you want to just say, make an expression of appreciation. So, the terms used in the Hebrew are neder and nidava. Neder is an oath, but the Hebrew word neder, which means oath, also is used as the name of the offering that you bring in fulfillment of the oath. Okay, so it serves a dual purpose. A nidava is an expression of generosity. It's a sort of a catch-all for free will offerings. It's a generic offering for something that you want to contribute to the sanctuary. And a contribution to the sanctuary, in this case, does not necessarily mean something that will go onto the altar. So, for example, not that I can think of a reason why they would want it, but I dedicate this cup to Rod Shalom. All right. Why? Why not? Now, and I say that half jokingly, but the reality is that in the years that I've been in the pulpit, the synagogues I've served have been the beneficiaries of some very odd and unusual things that people decide we can't live without. This is especially true of artwork.
I figured they'd say the same thing.
Right?
We were gifted some tapestries. Do you remember?
That, the tapestries that we were well to.
And the family's very upset that we didn't use them.
Yes, this is always what happens, which is, oh, the rabbi absolutely wants this in his office. No, the rabbi absolutely doesn't want that monstrosity in his office because it's the most depressing piece of art ever created, and the rabbi does not want to stare at it. That's why the rabbi has an office full of other things that he has hung.
Books.
Well, I was a little more modest here, but in my previous study, there was no empty space. So much so that I actually had something hanging on the wall in the hallway just outside of my office because I really, really wanted to put it up, but I didn't have space for it in my study after putting up all the other stuff.
Have an empty wall here.
I know, but I'm right now I'm risking it. Not to mention the fact that we left a bunch of our art sitting in my father-in-law's basement in New Jersey because we knew we were going to have less space. But it's a real problem because people really do get very, very upset when you say no to their treasured whatever it is. You know, and sometimes they're just kind of like, eh. And sometimes they're like, but we don't need it. You know, yeah. Bill, yes, I do see your hand.
Hi.
Hey,
Yes, Rabbi.
how's it going?
I noticed on the free will offering, you list, like cattle and goats and sheep. I noticed there seem to be more of value. So if it's free will, you want something more substantial than, say, offering a pigeon or something like that. Is that kind of part of how this works?
It can be, but it's also relative to the person who's bringing the offering. Right? Generally, we often think of generosity to a Jewish institution on a macro scale, but we have to think of it on a micro scale, no less so. It's just they're dealing. The reason they're listing these kinds of things is these are the things that could theoretically go on the altar, not necessarily on behalf of the individual, but the temple needs a supply of these kinds of critters for daily morning and evening sacrifices, for other purposes. So you could theoretically donate something on spec. Here. Take care of it until you need it. The other thing that we're going to see in the next section is there are restrictions and limitations on the animals that you can give. And part of it goes to loosely translated as, don't give your junk to the synagogue. Right? You know, over the years, this has happened more times than I care to remember, where someone is moving and they're downsizing, and all of a sudden, anything and everything that they can't easily dispose of ends up in a box or many boxes on our door, on the synagogue doorstep. In my last congregation, some woman actually paid someone to deliver 20 some odd boxes to the synagogue.
Unannounced.
Yes.
Judaica or just anything?
Well, Judaica is sort of a very broad catch-all category. All right, so when, because this was, okay, Rabbi, you have to go through this. Because someone's got to go through and make sure that there's stuff that doesn't need burial or blah, 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 blah. And the person, and I said to the person when I saw them, I said, what made you think that we needed this? But Rabbi, these are classics. And I'm going like, if they're classics, we probably already have them. We weren't waiting for you to downsize in order to buy, like,
Open the door for Barbara, I think.
a classic of Jewish literature or something. Yes, we have many copies of Heschel's The Sabbath. We don't need yours. We don't need,
Yarmulkes.
yeah, we don't need those. It's like, I'm glad you cleared out your keeper drawer, but it should have gone directly to the trash. Do not pass go, do not collect $200, and don't dump them in my lap.
Sam
Can
and I
you
had
throw a
that.
kippah away?
Yes,
I asked Rabbi,
it has absolutely no sanctity whatsoever.
Sam and I had that box up front, half cleaned out, and the really good ones were in the plastic. We were gonna clean them, put them
Huh.
back, and it's overflowing now, because a few people came in with bags.
Yes, because there's this presumption that I can't just throw them away. But in point of fact, you can throw them away. What's more of a complication is once you designate, this is an ancient world problem, not so much modern world problem. Once you designated an article or an animal or an anything for the temple, you couldn't say, oh, no, I didn't mean that one, I meant that one. To reclaim it, you now have to pay, I'll call it a penalty, but you have to pay like a tax of like 20% on that item in order to get it back. So if you said, I dedicate these candlesticks, except you meant those candlesticks, well, you now have to pay 20% above the cost of the candlesticks to get them back. So you have to be very judicious and cautious before you made that kind of a statement in the ancient world. I personally wanted to take those 20 some odd boxes and put them in someone's pickup truck and put them on her front lawn.
What did you do with them?
I went through all the boxes and found that most of it was superfluous at best. There must have been, I don't know, and it was not like it was all organized and whatever. It was a mess and a jumble. But there were, if a book had a Jewish author, it ended up in the box. It's like, just because something was written by a Jew doesn't mean it deserves a place in the synagogue library. Just because, you know, I'm trying to think of a good example.
All of Leon Nurse's book, like
Oh, yeah,
Battle Cry.
yeah, not every book written by Leon Uris deserves needs to be in a synagogue library, much less if it's that like seminal, like if it was, a copy of Leon Uris's Exodus. Okay, that's a classic. So how many decades ago was it written?
Oh, Lord.
Yes, which means that if it's that much of a classic, do you think that the synagogue library did not already have one
If they wanted it.
or two? So the goal here is to try to both encourage generosity, but provide a little bit of a don't make us your dumping ground.
If the source of the money came from an unethical person, would the synagogue then refuse it?
That depends on the circumstance and the institution. I can tell you that the Jewish Theological Seminary gave back a donation and removed the name of the donor from the building that it was originally on. Because between the time that the person made the donation and the time that a few years later, when things actually got built and whatnot, or were in the process of being built, it came out that he had made a lot of his money through unethical business practices and illegal business practices. And he had one of those, nice little jumpers with the numbers on it over here.
Oh. Three women board.
Yeah,
Kind
I'm
of like
blanking on his name. But it was supposed to be the, whatever his name was, library. Library being a very significant part of the institution.
All right, let me go back.
And instead it became the was it Finkelstein? It was named after two significant scholars and professors at the seminary. But for as nice as that was, you don't name things after scholars and whatever, because you name them after donors. But they were sort of hard up, and it was like, we got to put some name on it, and we're not looking for another donor at this point because we've already spent and built this whole thing. So,
A quick question. We've had this thing about unblemished animals almost through this whole process. So who does this whole check off? Make sure that this animal is free of blemish and then therefore worthy of sacrifice. And then what happens to this one that didn't make it to the sacrifice?
okay, so I call it a two-stage process at least. Step one is before you bring your animal to the temple, check it for all of these things. And if it's got any of these flaws, don't waste your time bringing it to the temple because it's going to be rejected. So that's part of why this has to be addressed to the entire community, so that when Joe decides that he wants to make a free will offering of his goat, just had a baby goat, all right, and I don't need another goat, or I want to just be generous, make sure that it doesn't have any of these blemishes, right? Most of which are generally birth defects.
Okay.
Right. The secondary category is injuries. Right. So theoretically, if the goat that you wanted to give to the temple fell down and broke its leg,
Yeah,
you don't, because it's gonna be rejected. It may be a perfectly fine goat to keep as part of your herd, and, will grow up and give milk and blah, blah, blah. Though if it was a male one, that probably wouldn't work so well. Look, there's a reason why most of the animals sacrificed are male. They're less necessary in a farming and agricultural community.
Remember that.
I'm available for sacrifice, but the blemish is.
It's not any different today when you think about the dairy industry, right? And the furor that sometimes rises and falls over the consumption of veal as a commodity.
But it's your own cows.
Yeah,
And we only need so many.
all right,
bulls.
and what happened, okay, and now what would happen, what does happen if a farmer who has a dairy farm has a bunch of male offspring that he doesn't want to raise or sell to or can't sell to the guy who's going to raise them as veal or beef? What happens to them? Yes, they're summarily killed at birth because the dairy farmer wants no part of them.
They're an expense.
They're an expense. That's absolutely what they are. But I need my cows to be lactating. And how do I achieve that?
What?
Well, that's not, no, I keep them lactating by keeping them either pregnant or post-pregnant while they're nursing.
So you need one bull per so many cows.
Well, now they actually use even artificial insemination, but you can get by with a bull or two or but you don't need a 1-to-1 ratio. You don't want, all right, you don't want a 1-to-1 ratio. If I am a cattle baron, I don't really care about gender per se, because I'm gonna raise it, I'm gonna bring it to slaughter, and whether it was a boy cow or a meat cow, you're not gonna tell the difference in the steak that you're gonna have on your plate. But the dairy industry needs pregnant/lactating cows. Well, doggone it, if they don't produce male offspring at essentially the same rate that they produce female offspring. Now, it may be that the technology that they're using for artificial insemination will start to use CRISPR technology such that they are genetically modified such that they are producing only female offspring, in which case you have the dairy farmer is now problem solved.
But then you got people out there screaming, whether you're killing the calves or you're genetically modifying them, people are gonna scream.
Yes, you're right, but
As a transgender cow.
Yeah.
But aren't we confusing what happens today versus what happens when there was a temple, when there was sacrifices, when there was, and these certainly do apply.
You didn't need that many male livestock.
Let me finish here. It seems like we're sort of focusing, we jump right into the ethics, the ethnicity or the ethics of these poor baby cows kind of thing. And I'm not sure that, is that what this is the intent, or is that an offset?
no, the intent here is ultimately, why do I bother giving you this list of defects, whether naturally occurring or a product of injury?
Because it wouldn't be appropriate you couldn't.
But why? Why aren't they appropriate?
What's,
Because what you want to give to God has got to be perfect.
What you want to give to God has to have a measure of perfection to it, or certainly not be damaged. In the same way that you are in the store buying a gift for a dear friend. All right, and you see, oh, this is like perfect. Oh, but it's got a tear. It's like, do you have another one of these? No. Oh, that's too bad, because this would be so perfect. But I don't buy the ripped one and say, here, friend, I thought this was perfect for you. Yeah, just ignore the damage. We don't do that unless it's something that you could accept as being damaged because, oh, this is a 200-year-old map of Virginia, and I know you love to collect old maps. In which case, if it's got some damage, it's like, it's 200 years old, but it's still very cool because it's a 200-year-old map of the place where I live. And thank you for thinking of me, and it's wonderful. But unless it's something of that nature, if it's supposed to be pristine and new, unless I didn't notice the flaw, I wouldn't give it to you. So why would you give something flawed, broken, imperfect to God?
well, I'm asking myself, is it like, the dog show in New York City where, they have these meticulous standards? Does the priest judge on that basis, like has to have X number, so tall and so wide, and they
No.
can't have more,
No, this was not like the county fair where they were judging
right?
against standards of ideal, or if you will, like which one is closest to perfection.
So the judgment was, they had to use their heads, not get carried away with.
And it's like, if it's got one of these, then it's out. If it's skinny, okay, so it's skinny,
Okay.
or,
Yeah.
it's too skinny, it's too fat, it's too tall, it's too short. All that stuff is not relevant as long as it's not damaged, right? There's a difference between physical variety or variation and defect, if you will.
Did they check for internal damage?
They check for internal damage.
Oh, you can only do that after the fact.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? So but you raise a good question. So let's say I bring the critter to the sacrifice, and this is going to be mine. All right, and you open it up and you say, ooh, that's that's like, let's say, diseased. All right, well, you would not then take the diseased stuff and put it on the altar. Okay? But that's not a frequent occurrence. Not to mention the degree to which, what's the standard that you're applying in terms of defect, internal, right? So I'm gonna posit that you've all heard the term glatt kosher.
Mhm.
Do you know what it means?
Yes,
Sort of.
Extra special kosher.
you told us in one of our classes.
Extra special good, yes. Okay, glatt is from the Yiddish, meaning smooth, right? And it meant that you would, when you cut open the animal, you will check specifically the lungs to make sure that they are smooth, that there aren't any lesions or other protrusions or growths on the lungs. That's what it means. It really refers specifically to lungs, not to necessarily to all organs. But that's not the standard of kashrut. That's the elevated standard of kashrut. The regular standard of kashrut allows for certain imperfections internally of the critter.
So I was right, extra special kosher.
Well, yeah. I just don't know that it's extra special as much as extra restrictive. All right, but yeah, yes, Barbara.
Who requires glot?
People who want to be especially strict and cautious. It's like, just in case, we're gonna go a little stricter. The problem with just in case we're gonna go a little stricter is that that's like a rabbit hole that you just keep going down. And in some ways, all it does is increase the cost of kosher meat, which is not a good thing. By the way, anytime you see the term glot kosher applied to something dairy,
It doesn't have lungs.
well, but then you do that, you get that.
Yeah.
Because part of what they're trying to say is that we are as careful with dairy products as this high standard of dairy, of meat, right? In that, the term is, the better term would be chalav Yisrael, meaning that the milk has been under Jewish aegis from the time that it was removed from the cow till the point where it was bottled and shipped to you.
Thank you. I didn't know what that meant.
Okay, so the problem is that not everybody knows what chalav Yisrael is, so places will talk about glot kosher, and it's like, that makes no sense, right? And they just look at you because they don't understand why it doesn't make any sense. Because they do what Elaine just did, which is glot means extra special kosher, without realizing that it's impossible term or ridiculous term when applied to dairy. Because it's not like they milked the cow and then checked its lungs,
You'd have to kill it.
which sort of defeats the purpose of having, cows that are lactating and giving you lots of milk over a long period of time. Okay, so you check it for defects, all right, verse 21. And when a man offers from the herd or the flock a sacrifice of well-being to the Lord for an explicit vow or as a free will offering, it must, to be acceptable, be without blemish. There must be no defect in it. Anything blind, injured, maimed, or with a wen, boil scar, or scurvy, you shall not offer to the Lord. You shall not put any of them on the altar as offerings by fire to the Lord.
So when?
It's different from a now. No, I actually have it written down here. Let me
It's a
see.
little skin thing.
Yeah,
yeah.
where did I?
It's a skin.
It's a skin thing,
It's a
but
skin
I have it written down
Like
somewhere.
a,
Blemish of some sort.
yeah,
Yeah.
Skin blemish. Okay, thank you.
it's raised and
Yeah,
round oval.
yeah. It's like a skin tag.
Thank you. Okay.
That's the term I have in my note here. All right, so, and some of them are naturally occurring, and some of them are products of injury. You may, however, present as a free will offering an ox or a sheep with a limb extended or contracted, but it will not be accepted for a vow. In other words, it's got a birth defect, right? One limb is shorter or longer than the others, right? For a free will offering, for a votive offering, it's okay. In fulfillment of a vow, it's not, right? Vow requires a higher level.
I'm sorry, did I miss the definition of a vow?
Oh,
Sacrifice.
okay,
I'll
so
look you
a
up.
vow is, I promise to bring an offering to the Lord if, I escape from this trouble.
Or my daughter gets married, or,
Whatever it is that
okay.
you are wanting to occur, you're making a vow that says, if X, then Y.
thank you.
And a free will is just because you want to. And because it's a just because you want to, you have a little extra latitude in terms of what you bring. And the defect is a naturally occurring one, not an accident. So it's not like, oh, I have this prize bull that I was going to show at the county fair, but some idiot put scarred it, and now it's not worth it to me. So I'll just give it to the temple.
And 22 boxes.
Well, I suppose I should be happy there weren't any cow parts in those 22 boxes. So those are, so in that case, you're given a little extra latitude because it's a natural defect, and God's willing to say, hey, you know what? I'm willing to take it back because you're not doing it because you have to. You just want to be nice. Okay, I can be nice too, so to speak.
Generous.
All right, verse 24. You shall not offer to the Lord anything with its testes bruised or crushed or torn or cut off. You shall have no practices in your own, shall have no such practices in your own land, nor shall you accept such animals from a foreigner for offering as food for your God, for they are mutilated. They have a defect. They shall not be accepted in your favor. And all of these are examples of things that were not naturally occurring, but castration was not an uncommon phenomenon in animal husbandry. Because let's say you did want to keep a few male critters around, if you didn't necessarily want them for procreative purposes, you would often neuter them in order to theoretically mitigate some of their more aggressive tendencies. By the way, this rule is a subject of interesting discussion in modernity, but not in where you think. How many of you have a cat or a dog? Okay. Has your cat or dog been fixed? Yeah, well, theoretically, this says you're not allowed to.
If I wanted to sacrifice the dog.
No,
No, it's
not at all. Just in general, you should not only will you, is it unacceptable as an offering? You shall have no such practices in your land. In other words, you should not be doing it at all. That extra clause in there is not about sacrifices, because you don't need to say that if it's only about sacrifices. Right, so there's a whole lot of debate as to whether that you shall have no such practices applies to the immediate previous, which is about, castration, other damage to testes, or
Is Myron fixed?
Myron is, but Myron was fixed before we knew him.
Oh, that's the exception to the rule.
Well, it's a fact. I
Would
mean,
you have?
it's a great question.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought about it a lot.
Seriously?
Well, yeah, I thought about the question, but the minute we chose to get a rescue dog, by definition, it was going to be fixed before we got it.
Mhm.
Which sort of got us a little bit off the horns of a conundrum as to whether we would task someone to do it. But Myron was fixed before we ever met him, knew him, and was not done at our behest or at our request.
So if you got a puppy,
If we got a puppy, I would have to really think seriously about this.
And what is the reason not to do it?
Because it says so right here in the Torah.
What does it say?
It says, since anything with its testes bruised or crushed or torn or cut off is unacceptable as an offering, you shall have no such practices of bruising, crushing, or tearing or cutting off testes in your land.
interesting.
It's like male castration, which was done here in the States.
It's what I want to do to every man who's an anti-Semite.
What a good
And
idea.
now you're telling me I can't do it.
Amongst other reasons, yes.
Why, let me ask you a question though. Why is this discussion here? Why isn't it earlier when we talk about animals without blemish? It is not the first time it's come up, but all of a sudden we're getting this great detail here. Why here, not earlier?
Oh, I'm gonna suggest that the reason it is here as opposed to not earlier, when we talked about various animals for sacrifice, it was very much within the realm of what the Kohanim were doing.
Okay.
Right? This is how you brought stuff to the altar. It was in a more narrow context, whereas here, because this is addressed to the entire population, it's like, yo, Farmer Joe, do you think no, don't do that to your kid, to your cow. Or to your bull, or to your goat, or to your whatever.
Steer.
Thank you.
Steer away from that.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
question, does this apply to female dogs?
Email.
Well, again,
Huh?
depends on, you have two schools of thought on this subject. One is that you read this very narrowly, and as a very narrow statement, it refers only to male animals. Not to mention that in the ancient world and in the pre-modern world, you didn't routinely neuter your animals, your female animals, because you dafka wanted them to be productive and reproductive. All right. And pets were not a widely held thing in the ancient world. And in many Jewish communities, they're still not particularly well received. And in the Islamic world, dogs are not well thought of. There's a whole strand that talks that the saliva of a dog will make you ritually impure or just transfer impurity to you. When we were living in Albany, Jody was a part of a local chapter of Salam Shalom, which was an organization that brought together Jewish and Muslim women.
Oh,
And they did some really fascinating stuff. Imagine it's got to be a little rocky at the moment, but when Jody was hosting, we warned people about the fact that we had a dog, and someone asked, "Well, can you just put him in another room?" And the answer is yes, but he'll go like he won't shut up, because. If you've met Myron, he loves people. He's a real people person, right? So if he hears the door bell and the door opening and closing, and he's in a back room with me, I may as well be not be there, because he's just going to go crazy, knowing that there's people in the house that he hasn't played with. All right, and the reality is that after he greets people and after a few minutes, he'll just mellow out and lie down and be fine. But for one of the Muslim women, this was a real issue, because she was really afraid that the dog was going to lick her. And Jody honestly couldn't promise that he wouldn't. Or that he wouldn't try at least. So the popularity of dogs, and some degree cats, I guess, too, is in a similar thing, in that in some communities, they're very well received, and in others, not so much. But to finish answering your question, Bev, while many read it very narrowly as applying only to male animals, there's a cogent argument to be made that today, when we're talking about non-farm animals, it is no less a mutilative act to spay a female cat or dog as opposed to a male one.
Is this extrapolated then to human beings? Am I going too far?
You don't have to go that far, because at the beginning of the chapter, most of these criteria are actually applied to the Kohanim. So a Kohen who has some of these defects,
Mark,
whether by
speaking of
birth
the
or
Kohanim.
injury. Okay, Mark, hold that thought for half a sec. Has one of those, is not allowed to officiate, but receives all the other benefits of being a Kohen. So Kohanim are given, portions of the sacrifices and portions, and they get the tithes and the trumot that are brought to the temple. They're the beneficiaries of a lot of stuff. So you are entitled to all of that, because that's how you survive, but you're not allowed to officiate. Mark.
Okay. One of the problems that I have with Judaism in general is that we pick and choose what things we'll do just because it's in the Torah, and yet there are other things that it says we should do or avoid doing, and we disregard those because of a multitude of reasons, part of which we live in a different time. But it really bothers me how in
Mark.
Rabbinic Judaism we pick and choose what we follow just because it says to do it.
Okay, Mark, I'm going to say two things. One is, give me a specific example.
Yeah.
And then I'll tell you why you're wrong.
Okay. A man should not have sex with a man because it's an abomination in God's sight. But
Yep.
yet today, I'm glad that we welcome gay
Okay,
people.
so here's my response. Two-tiered response. One, you started to note the fact that we actually don't live biblical Judaism. We live rabbinic Judaism. And inherent in rabbinic Judaism is that Jewish law evolves. And if it didn't, we wouldn't be sitting here, because we wouldn't exist. Because the vast majority of biblical legislation is built around the temple. And if the rabbis had said, or instead of the rabbis building a Judaism that functions outside of and without the temple, Judaism and the Jewish people would have died. Not only do we not live an agrarian lifestyle, which permeates the Torah. And not only do we not have a temple, which permeates the Torah, if we were to even observe the things that we think we can't. So for example, we just did Passover, yes?
Yes.
You may have heard about it. Okay?
No, I passed
How do you
over
observe-
that one. I passed over that
How
one.
do you observe Passover? Did you invite, your family and your neighbors and your friends to go to Jerusalem with you and slaughter a ram?
Thought about it.
But you didn't,
No.
right? But that's how you do Passover in the Torah. They don't know from a Seder. Now, imagine if the totality of observance of Passover was bring offerings. Oh, can't do that anymore. Okay. And eat matzah. You think that's gonna last? Or and not even eat matzah, don't eat leaven. That's not an inspiring holiday or an inspiring observance of a holiday. And if every holiday is predicated on going to a central location which no longer exists, and I don't have replacements, then that is a religious dead end. And we would not exist. So the rabbis created a model of Judaism that was evolving to meet the realities and the growing awareness of human beings and human need. Think about the fact that for a protracted period of time, what happened at a funeral of someone who committed suicide?
They were buried outside the gate.
They were either buried or they were buried right on the edge of the cemetery, and you didn't have a service, and you
Or someone forged their death certificate.
that's not a solution, Celia.
No, but it happened.
Or do you do what the rabbis came to understand, which is that people who commit suicide are usually driven by what I'm going to use the catch-all phrase of mental incapacity,
Mhm.
whether it's as a product of pain and suffering or some other distress. Why did they do that? They did that because they recognized that we understand better the nature of human beings and what drives someone to that extreme.
Mhm.
And we want to not punish the family of that person, or that person for that matter, but since funerals and post-funeral stuff is really much more about the family, it was a way of bringing them back into a more normative post-loss format. Now, if you would like to go back to a biblical model, let me know, and just make sure you stay far away from me when you're here on Shabbat, because I'll just have a nice big pile of stones to pelt you with. Okay, Elaine.
One of the things that I love most about Judaism is that we have choices.
Be more specific, because you may be defining choice in a place where I may not see choice.
I can be a good Jew and only come to services on Saturday.
Okay, but what's the presumption? And because I'm not sure I agree with your premise, by the way.
I don't understand what you're asking.
Okay, so I only come to shul on Shabbat morning. Okay, there are many Jews in the Orthodox world and the non-Orthodox world who come to shul every Shabbat. That is not the criteria for being a good Jew. It's an act, an activity. I would never use it to define whether you're a good Jew or not.
And define
No.
a good Jew.
Well, if I want to use a traditional definition, someone who observes mitzvot,
Mhm.
because that defines what you do when you're not sitting in the sanctuary or having kiddush for those 3 hours.
So I can choose what mitzvot I want to do.
No,
No?
that's not the way the system works. It may be the way you do it, but that's not really the way the system works. Mitzvot, by their definition, what does the word mitzvah mean?
Commandments.
Ah, so wrong. Now try again. What does the word mitzvah mean?
Blessing.
Even wronger.
Commandment.
Commandment. What does the word command mean?
Do.
Not optional.
Do.
Not optional. That's what commandment means.
So do you do all 630?
Nobody does all 613 because if you were paying attention, I told you that's most of a great many of them have to do with the temple that doesn't exist and with farming that I don't do and a whole lot of other stuff
So
that I
isn't
don't.
that choice?
That's not a matter of choice. I can't observe sacrifices if there's no place to do them. It's just it's not even a question of, now, if you ask me, do I want to go back to a sacrificial system? The answer is no. But the fact is that it's a moot point because there is nowhere to do it. Because the theoretical only place where I can bring sacrifices is this hilltop in Jerusalem that is currently not available. Right? Right? I'm not a farmer. I'm not going to be a farmer. I don't anticipate becoming a farmer at any point in my life, nor do I anticipate that my children are going to become farmers. So all of the rules that apply to farming, even if I wanted to say they applied outside the land of Israel, which we usually say they don't, is moot because I don't do any of those things, right? So there are a whole host of mitzvot that don't apply to me just because of who I am. Conversely, there are laws that apply only to Kohanim. I'm not a Kohen. Therefore, those are irrelevant to me. I can't observe them. I can't not observe them. They don't matter. You know? There are rules that do apply to me. And my goal is to try to meet those expectations. That's the way the system is designed.
So if I don't have a kosher home, am I a bad Jew?
I hate using that. That's between you and God. You can talk to him about it. Or her. You should live and be well till 120, and then you'll deal with the Holy One. Right? And by the way, again, the problem is you're narrowing the question of whether good or bad is predicated on the observance of a specific commandment. Because, right? So let's say you observe kashrut and you are a mean, nasty, unethical, immoral human being.
Yes.
Does that make you a good Jew?
No.
Nope.
No. All right. So observing a specific mitzvah doesn't make you a good Jew. Not observing a specific mitzvah doesn't make you a bad Jew, because there's a whole lot of stuff that you as a Jew are expected to do. And I don't know about you, but I always hope that the Holy One grades on the curve.
Right. So that's why I say
That's a great
choices.
line.
But it's,
Yeah,
no, but the
so-
choice is not
Not
whether,
a choice.
the choice is whether I do it or not, but that doesn't mean it's not without consequence. It's not that the system says, here, pick and choose what you want. It's not a smorgasbord. I may pick and choose what I observe, but in Judaism, non-observance of the things that I'm expected to observe is called sin. That's why we have this whole atonement thing going on in the fall. Because as a model, Judaism says, these are the things that you're expected to do. You may not do all of them. I get that. None of us may do all of them. But do I recognize that there are expectations that I may not meet? Do I recognize that there are obligations that fall to me, whether I know it or observe it or not? Right? Let's take something less less daunting than kashrut.
Reading the Megillah every year, reading the entire Megillah every year.
And when I was going to stick with something a little more biblical.
I'm sorry.
But okay, since you mentioned it, we'll use that one.
Okay.
All right, because well, it's not in the
I
Torah.
couldn't hear what he said.
Till centuries after the Torah is done. But yes, think, what do we say before we start reading the
Excuse
Megillah?
me, Rabbi, Mark didn't hear what Arnie said.
Reading the Megillah on Purim.
There's a mitzvah to read the.
Okay,
entire Megillah.
and as a prelude to reading it, before we start reading it, we say, Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, who has sanctified us by commandments or with commandments and commanded us to read the Megillah. All right. So therefore, the act of reading the Megillah is elevated by the sages to the performance of a mitzvah. In fact, it's one of the 4 mitzvot associated with Purim. Right? What if I only do 3 of them? What if I only do 1 of them? Right? On one level, there are 4 opportunities presented to me, 4 commandments, 4 obligations that fall to me for my observance of Purim. And if I choose not to do certain things, that is a matter of choice, because we do have choice. But understand that if you look at the system as it is comported, there are consequences to choice. That's part of to take in a very different direction for 2 seconds. That's part of why I'm so miffed at some of these academic institutions who are allowing students to break the law, both of the school and the community, and let them off scot-free. I'm sorry, there are consequences. You want to do that, Gesundheit. You know, I spent more time in front of the Soviet consulate in Montreal than my mother would have cared for. And no less when I was in college in front of the Soviet embassy in New York. The difference is when the police said, okay, you need to move there, I moved there. All right, my message was delivered without violating the law. Theoretically, what would have happened had I not moved?
That's the Russian embassy calling.
I would have. Yeah, they stopped spying on me a long time ago. Theoretically, if I did not do what the police officer said, he would have had every right to say, okay, take him. And there would have been consequences. And if there were, I can't say, oh, well, you know, I was just exercising free speech. No, there are consequences.
Do the crime, pay the time.
All right.
Punishment physical.
And that's just, there are consequences. Now, that goes to your whole belief system of reward and punishment, and do I think God keeps track and a whole lot of other stuff. But as a systemic matter, if you have commandments, the non-performance of them have consequences. Whether I believe that model or not is up to me. Right? But the idea that mitzvah means good deed is unfortunate, because I think it hides what it really is all about. And though there's so many things that we do can't be defined as good deeds. Okay? Is eating matzah on Pesach a good deed?
No.
Yes,
No, it's not a
Tastes-
good deed. It's a mitzvah. It's a commandment. It's an obligation. It's an expectation, but you can't define it as a good deed. When my grandmother, Aleh Shalom, said, Dovidel, do a mitzvah, right? She was using it in the sense of good deed, like I want you to do something for me. But on another level, whether she was consciously channeling it or not, she was actually saying, you know, grandson of mine, there is this mitzvah of kibud av va'em, of honoring one's parents and honoring one's elders. And so when I ask you to do what I'm about to ask you to do, just go do it and don't give me any back talk. So yes, she was using it in that sense of it's a mitzvah, go do it. You know, and it could have been something very mundane, or it could have been something like, you know, my friend Mrs. Resnick is coming over, go help her up the stairs. Was it a good deed? Yes. Was it a mitzvah? Yes, on a multitude of levels, in that I was acquiescing to a request from my grandmother, Aleh Shalom, and I was helping an elderly friend of hers navigate the stairs so that she was safe. There was any number of mitzvot, real mitzvot, that I was doing that could be defined as a good deed. But on one level, the predicate of it is, this is a non-optional request.
Right.
Then I have a question for you.
And I have an answer for you. And I just want to check the time. Ooh, it's 1:08.
Just stop and ask the question. Another-
Yeah.
Ask your question.
But-
I'll decide whether I'm going to answer it.
Fire along in.
Well, ask the question, at least I have time to think about it.
Yeah, don't stop. This is the best stuff we've been talking about all hour.
Okay. If this stuff is no longer relevant because we no longer have the altar, the sanctuary, etc., why are we still studying it? It's not just like, it's not an historical thing that therefore, if I understand this, it will help me to deal with today.
Okay, well, I'm going to give you three very specific to this Parsha examples.
Okay.
Like one or two of which we touched on already, right? The underlying premises of what you bring to the temple informs what we should bring to the synagogue, right? I'll go back to those 22 boxes of junk that got dumped in my lap at my last congregation because someone decided
You missed that.
to clear out their basement before they moved. Right?
Okay.
That's not what giving to the synagogue ought to be. It's not an easy way for you to unburden yourself. So that's one direct example. Second, all right, we talked about the applicability of this whole question of neutering and spaying. Right? And the third one, which we didn't talk about, was also in this week's Parsha, is the idea that a Kohen who was somehow imperfect was not allowed to officiate in a public forum. And how do we react to that in terms of our sensibilities and reaction to people with impairment today?
Okay.
Right? So just from this little Parsha, there are values and conversations which are triggered that ought to have us thinking about stuff in the present.
Can I just make a
It
comment
wasn't even that long an answer.
relating to Elaine, the picking and choosing and what's a good Jew and all of that stuff? Cause I understand where you're coming from on that, I think. But when I read the Torah, it seems to be telling me what I need to be doing and thinking about to help repair the world. So when you talk about what makes a good Jew and is eating kosher, I certainly do not have the credentials to decide if somebody is a good Jew or a bad Jew. But when I look at people's behavior, I don't have the right to judge. But I look at people's behavior and to use you as an example, when I look at the way you treat other people, it blows me away because you take care of a lot of people. So does that mean you're a good Jew or a bad Jew? I don't know.
I think that's the wrong question to ever ask.
Yes, I agree.
If you're a good Jew or a bad Jew.
That's a question between you
You
and
and
God.
Right, and I'm just saying it because it's the way that Elaine phrased it. That, I don't know what makes a good Jew or a bad Jew. I don't know if there's such a thing.
Part of the problem with that is, I grew up in Baltimore. I belong to.
No.
No, and I belong to a Reformed congregation. Do you know how much junk I got from all the other people? Cause you're Reformed as if like you're not Jewish.
Yeah. It was the way it was here too.
Yeah.
Because
Everywhere.
You got the age of.
Well, because people who are more traditionally observant will often use that as the metric for stuff. But the question becomes, how do you grapple with the ethical and non-ritual aspects of things? And they're not meant to be mutually separate or exclusive realms. I'm gonna come back to Pesach for a second. When we say, halach ma'anya, this is the bread of affliction which our ancestors ate, blah, blah, blah. Kol dichbin yete, all who are needy, all right? Nobody's ever walked through my front door, even though it's open at that point in the service. Someone will come through your front door ever? No, you?
Well. When we asked for Elijah to come in,
No, I'm talking about way at the beginning.
okay,
The answer
because your grandpa always comes to the door.
No, I'm not talking about someone pranking. I'm talking about someone who's in real need. That's not the reality, all right? But the whole
Right.
point of that whole section is part of how you express your liberty and your liberation is by taking care of those in need. That's a religious obligation. It's a commandment. It's a divine expectation. And if you do that, that's a positive. And it's from a Judaism perspective, it's more than just a good deed. Because if I reduce all of it to good deeds, then that's just being a nice person. But what if I decide I don't want to? Non-optional.
Mhm.
It's a difference between charity and tzedakah. Charity is a Christian term. It emerges from the sense of, oh, I feel badly for someone, or I have empathy or sympathy for someone suffering, so therefore I'll do something. But if I don't feel it, then, oh, well, I don't have to do anything. What's the root of the word tzedakah? Justice.
Mhm.
All right, non-optional. You have an obligation to pursue justice in your society, in your community, in your world, not optional. Don't care whether you want to be nice to someone else or not. Okay, Elaine, thank you for your patience.
And this is
future votes in my head. Where does it fall for someone to take part in the Hefer Kadisha? What is that?
It's a mitzvah. We have a collective obligation that is often met by a limited number of people to take care of those who have died. It's a mitzvah. It's an absolute commandment. And I might even argue that it is it's a commandment which is sort of is a paying it forward, because we don't compensate, we don't get compensation. We don't do it for a sense of, oh, yay, me, I'm doing this. We do it because we feel this tremendous impetus to do right by the deceased.
Mhm.
Is it more important than observing Shabbat? I'm not prepared to put
Right.
gradations on mitzvot. Is it less important than observing kashrut? Not prepared to rank the mitzvot. But I recognize that there are going to be members of any Jewish community who will do X and not do Y. And does that make them better or worse? I would say no, they might differentiate. Right? There are Jews who think that sitting and studying Torah all day is the be all and end all of everything, and that they're saving the Jewish people because they're sitting and studying Torah all day. I would love to sit and study Torah all day. It'll be wonderful. It'll be great. But I'm not in academia, and I'm not in that universe. And even if I wasn't clergy, where you might think that I get a chance to spend all day studying Torah, but I don't. There's this obligation to build the world, to contribute to society. And they may have convinced themselves that because they're studying Torah, they're saving the world. My answer would be no. You want to save the world? Get out in the world and save the world. You can't do a mitzvah alone. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. You're distorting Judaism. And most people I know don't do just a mitzvah. Whether they recognize that what they do falls under that terminology or not. You know, you comfort someone who's mourning. Am I doing it out of a sense of compassion and kindness? Yes, sure. Am I doing it as an expression of friendship to the person? Sure. Is it a mitzvah? Yes. You know, I'm doing an unveiling tomorrow for someone who is buried here but didn't live here anymore, and whose family doesn't live here but is traveling here for the thing. And counting the members of the family and myself, we had 500,000.
Oh.
That's a little number. Which means that the other 500,000 is being made up of people who don't know the deceased, don't know the family. Well, actually, I take that back. There's one person who knew the deceased. And they're going to show up because
We need a minion.
we need a minion,
Mhm.
right? And are they doing it out of a sense of kindness and compassion to the family? Sure. But whether they recognize it or not, they've been conditioned that it's a mitzvah to do this. It's a mitzvah to
Right.
provide the venue and the opportunity for someone to say Kaddish for a loved one. So the problem is it's sort of nestled back here, and it doesn't always come to the foreground of our thought or mind, but it's there. It's a motivator. It's the impetus by which we do many things which we don't always call commandments.
But that may be where this idea of picking and choosing that terminology comes from, because there are certain things that a person can do that's part of our heritage, and it's the way Jewish people live and how we take care of one another, and there's certain things we can't do.
Yeah, I'm gonna disagree with you a little bit and say that I think this idea of choice is a function of modernity.
Yeah,
And very much American identity of individualism. You know,
Yes.
I decide, I am the greatest thing. I am the ultimate arbiter of everything.
but the eye knows what the eye can do.
It's not a question about knowing what you can do, because I would argue that there are many things that our tradition expects that people can do, but still choose not to.
Yes.
Yeah,
All right, so I think that's where we have to be very, very careful. Mark,
Excuse me, I love the discussion, but I have to go to the wound care place to get my stuff taken care of. Thank you for a great session.
okay, go take care of your boo-boo, and I'm gonna send everybody else to lunch.
yeah.
We are going to Mellow Mushroom. Would anybody like to join us?
Are you one of the 10?
I would love to mellow out with you, but I cannot.
We're not gonna do this.
No,
We're gonna
I wasn't
eat.
planning on getting that mellow
Oh.
either, but I have,
This was very good.
I have too many other obligations.
Great discussion.
This was a great
And
discussion.
this is why we study Torah.
And this is
Yes,
why we
yes.
come all the way from Virginia Beach.
All the way.
Through
to the-
three
through the tunnel.
accidents.
Oh,
Right.
God, it
Three
was-
accidents.
Only 3?
Yeah.
Well, it's a good thing it wasn't a
The,
hazmat like
the
last week.
eastbound tunnel was backed up to the Coliseum.
Jeez.
Wow, Brian's going over there.
Oh.
Whoa, that's past LaSalle.
I suppose I would be more like, upset if I actually knew what
What
that
that
What you're
was.
talking about.
That's.
It's, you know where the.
I assumed there was a big
You
backup.
know where that big sports coliseum is that has colored lights?
On Mercury Boulevard.
No,
It's
An
when you
upside
go
down
64,
Looks like a
There's
spaceship.
water and there's a building behind it.
like the concert place?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I know where that
The
is.
south
That's-
right after that.
If we had hockey games, that's where it would be.
We did it one time. One
I
time,
know.
Yeah, now he's gotta go to Norfolk.
So the thing that, the passage that we read today
Yo,
about the testicles and all of that. My assumption was that we didn't do certain things because it's cruel.
well, that is certainly a piece of it. But we can't, Dafka, we really can't rely on people determining and not acting cruelly,
Yeah.
right? Witness, the governor of South Dakota,
Yes.
Oh, gosh,
right? Who,
it's nuts.
it's like, okay. There are ways of dealing with
She,
an animal that is dangerous, right? Like, there was one in the White House, right?
Yeah.
Not living in the White House
Yeah.
anymore. They didn't put it down.
That's how they took care of it. They removed him out of the building.
But-
That
and
was
they
our first
found-
mistake.
Hmm?
First mistake was not putting it down.
Oh. But he could be
That was a joke.
the,
So is that an act of cruelty? Yes. And stupidity. And then bragging about it is an even greater act of stupidity. But, so I can't rely on I would love to, but I can't
No.
rely on individuals
No.
to necessarily do the right thing.
Right.
So I concretize the value system in do's and don'ts. Because that way I can give you some guidelines on how to navigate stuff in the world.
but my thought is, when I read this in the Torah, that the real point is that we shouldn't, that we shouldn't do things we shouldn't be cruel.
Okay,
It may just be that God tells you, don't boil the kid in the mother's milk. And that's to me, that sounds humane.
no, that's it because
But
it was a pagan practice.
Right, but, I think the pagan practices are not humane.
Well, some
But-
can or can't be,
but-
and let's not get too literal minded all the time. Right? Whether or not the purpose of some of these rules is to refine us as human beings, which I believe is true, you can't have that exist in a vacuum.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're
This was
welcome,
great.
as always.
I'm sorry we were late.
That's okay. It
Wouldn't
seems like
have-
you had to overcome many obstacles.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank
Bye,
you.
guys.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Let me check, because I'm not sure what, I asked for a couple of extras just in case. I will, thank you.
Another time.
Yes.
My schedule.
Susan doing okay?
Join us.
I know a lot of retired people have very crowded schedules.
I'm being sarcastic.
Is Susan doing okay?
All right, thank you.
No, I love your, I love it because the whole idea about, I almost joked about you talking about the woman that killed the dog, because you were able to rank that, but everybody says, if I do this one, I don't do that one. It's almost like, can you give me permission for not doing it? No, that'd be okay. I'm like, wait. Look, the reality is that,
sorry.
The reform movement does that to some degree, but not the way most people understand.
I think people do this, period. And then the other one is for the Orthodox, because you're reinforcing your values by saying the following people are wrong in doing this, and not doing that.